You know, I thought I had the dream. Her name's Megan, and she's everything I ever wanted in a woman. Beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who could command a room just by walking into it. We met in college. I was the guy with no idea what I wanted from life, and well, Megan knew exactly what she wanted. From day one, she had her life planned out, career, travel, everything. She pulled me in with that certainty. I admired it. We've been married for 6 years now. Megan's become a bit of a local celebrity. She's a dance instructor, and people around town look up to her. She's got this way of making everyone feel like they're important, you know. She could be charming when she wanted to be. Sometimes too charming. But she was also sharp. Like, if someone crossed her, they'd know not to do it again. Megan had this attitude where she always had to be in control. If something didn't go her way, you could expect to hear about it. But that was just her, fiercely independent, a bit guarded, but someone who wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Things were normal, for the most part. Busy, hectic sometimes, especially with Megan's dance school taking off. And to be honest, I always thought that was a good thing. She'd come home exhausted, we'd talk a little about her day, and I'd try to be supportive. But, you know how it is, you don't always realize when the distance starts creeping in. It wasn't that Megan and I didn't love each other. We did, or at least, I thought we did. But lately, well, something just felt off. Little things. You start noticing them, and at first, you brush them aside. Like how she was constantly texting, even when we were supposed to be having us time. Or the way she'd get defensive over the smallest things, like where she was or who she was with. But Megan's always been a private person, so I figured maybe it was just me being paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid, was I? One of my favorite things, even after years together, was taking a shower with Megan. It was kind of our thing, no matter how crazy life got, we'd always make time for it. It wasn't just about the intimacy, though that was part of it. It was more about those quiet moments where it was just the two of us, no distractions. Under the hot water, everything else seemed to melt away. We'd talk about our day, or nothing at all, just enjoying the closeness. Megan loved the water scalding hot, and every time I stepped in after her, I'd yelp like I was being burned alive. She'd laugh, turning the temperature down just a little, but not enough to make it comfortable for me. She'd always claim I was exaggerating, and I'd always let it go because her smile was worth it. There was something about those showers that made us feel connected again. She'd wash my hair, her fingers massaging my scalp in a way that made all the stress of the day disappear. I'd stand behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, resting my chin on her shoulder like we were the only two people in the world. For a while, in that tiny, steamy space, it felt like we were. But lately, even though we were still doing it, something had changed. It was subtle at first. Megan seemed distracted, almost like she was somewhere else even when she was standing right in front of me. She'd be quicker to get out, not lingering like she used to. And the conversations that used to flow so easily, they were starting to feel forced. I didn't say anything, I told myself it was just stress, or maybe she was tired. But I felt it, that creeping sense that something wasn't right. I held on to those showers, though, like they were the last thread keeping us together. Maybe that's why I didn't notice what was really happening, at least, not yet. The thing about routines is, you don't notice the cracks until they're big enough to break everything apart. Even though Megan and I still showered together, something felt off. She wasn't as present anymore, you know. Like her body was there, but her mind was somewhere else. I'd be talking about my day, or a funny thing that happened at work, and she'd give me these half-hearted responses, like she was on autopilot. Sometimes, she wouldn't say anything at all, just smile and nod, and I'd wonder if she even heard what I said. It started creeping into other parts of our life too. We'd sit down for dinner, and she'd be glued to her phone, texting away. She'd claim it was work stuff, clients asking about scheduling or new students interested in her dance classes. And I believed her because Megan was good at what she did. She took her job seriously, always wanting to be the best. But there were moments when I caught a flicker of something in her expression, a smile that felt different. It wasn't the usual, "I love my job" smile. It was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried not to overthink it. I mean, people get busy, right? Relationships go through phases. We had been together for years, and I knew things weren't going to stay as passionate or carefree as they were in the beginning. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Megan wasn't telling me. There were nights when she'd come home late from the studio, saying she had to stay behind to help one of her students with a routine. I trusted her. I did. But there was a nagging voice in the back of my head that wouldn't shut up. And then, there were the random excuses: her phone was always on silent, or she'd step out to take a call and come back looking, I don't know, flustered. I convinced myself that I was being paranoid. Megan was busy, stressed, tired, all valid reasons for why she seemed distant. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it than that. If something else, or someone else, was pulling her attention away. I didn't know it yet, but the cracks in our routine were only the beginning. So, it was a Thursday night, nothing special, just another regular evening. I had been working late, trying to finish up a project, and Megan had already headed upstairs to shower. Normally, I'd follow her in right after, but that night I stayed a bit longer in the living room, lost in my thoughts. After a while, I figured I'd go join her like we usually did. You know, keep the routine going. As I walked into the bathroom, the steam hit me immediately, clouding up the mirrors. I could hear the water running and Megan humming softly to herself. I smiled, ready to hop in. But as I pulled back the shower curtain, I froze. There she was, standing under the water, her phone raised, taking a photo of her body. Naked, obviously, but it wasn't the sight of her that stunned me, it was the fact that she was doing it in the first place. Megan never did stuff like that. Before I could even say a word, she spun around and screamed, dropping her phone into the water with a splash. Her face turned pale, then flushed with panic. "What the hell, Ben?" she shouted, quickly grabbing a towel and wrapping it around herself, practically wriggling out of my reach as she fumbled to get out of the shower. I stood there, speechless. "Megan, I didn't mean to." "You ruined the surprise," she snapped, cutting me off, her voice shaking. I was going to send you a picture, okay? I thought I'd surprise you and invite you to join me in the shower through a text. But now you've gone and ruined it." I blinked, still trying to process what had just happened. "A picture? For me?" She nodded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she stepped out of the bathroom, clearly rattled. "Yes, Ben, for you. I thought it would be fun to send you a flirty text while you were downstairs, but now, well, what's the point?" She shook her head, almost frustrated. I stood there for a second, taking in her words, and tried to calm myself down. It made sense, didn't it? Couples do stuff like that all the time. Maybe I just walked in at the wrong moment. I wanted to believe her. And yet, that sinking feeling in my gut didn't go away completely. I smiled, forcing myself to relax. "All right, I get it. Sorry for spoiling the surprise. I guess I was just eager to join you." She gave me a tight smile, still looking a little flustered, but she nodded. "It's fine. Just, give me a minute, okay?" I backed out of the bathroom, trying to shake off the weird tension. But something about the way she'd reacted stuck with me, lingering in the back of my mind like a tiny whisper that I couldn't ignore. The next morning, things felt off. Megan was acting normal, or at least, pretending to be. She kissed me goodbye before heading off to the studio, but something about last night still bothered me. Maybe it was how quick she'd been to explain, or how rattled she seemed. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, though, so I brushed it off. I went about my day, trying to focus on work, but that nagging feeling wouldn't let up. After a while, I decided to grab my laptop, thinking I'd get ahead on a few emails. As I opened it up, the screen flickered on, and a window popped up. It was a draft of an email, one Megan must have left open by accident. The subject line was blank, and there was no addressee. Just the body of the message. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe she had been writing something for her work. But then, my eyes landed on the photo, the same one I had seen her take in the shower last night. The one she said was for me. Except this, didn't feel like it was meant for me. I stared at the image, my mind spinning. There was no message with it, no explanation, just the photo. I tried telling myself that it was exactly what she said it was, a surprise for me, a flirty moment that I'd ruined by walking in too soon. But if that were true, why was there no recipient? No sign that it was ever meant to be sent to me? 1,000 questions ran through my mind all at once. Had I overreacted last night? Or was I seeing something now that I was never supposed to see? I stared at the screen, my gut twisting in knots. Was that photo really for me? Or had it been for someone else? Suddenly, all the little things that had been bothering me started rushing back, the late nights, the secretive texts, her constant need to keep her phone on silent. And now this. A photo, taken in the shower, left in a draft with no one's name on it. I closed the laptop, trying to push the thought away, but it lingered in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that there was nothing going on. But for the first time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. That day at work, I was still trying to shake off the weirdness from the night before. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe Megan really had been planning a surprise, and I just ruined the moment. But then, around 2 p.m., I got an email notification on my phone. It was from Megan. "Hey babe, I was thinking about last night. Sorry if I seemed off. How about you meet me in the shower at 4 today? I promise I'll make it up to you. I'll be waiting," winky face. The email had a flirty tone, the kind she used to send me years ago when we'd still play those fun, spontaneous games with each other. But something felt off. The timing was strange. She knew I had work until 6, and we hadn't planned anything for the afternoon. Why would she invite me home, knowing I couldn't just leave like that? But curiosity got the best of me. That feeling I couldn't shake, the uneasiness, it gnawed at me. I told my boss I needed to handle something personal, asked for a few hours off, and headed home. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Megan's car was already there. My heart was racing, but I couldn't figure out why. Maybe I was just being paranoid, I told myself. Maybe she really was trying to surprise me, trying to fix whatever weird energy had been creeping between us. I opened the door quietly, stepping inside, and immediately heard the water running in the shower. The sound of it made my stomach twist, but I couldn't say why. I dropped my keys on the table and made my way upstairs, undressing as I went, telling myself to relax. This was normal. This was fine. As I reached the bathroom door, I paused. The water was still running. Steam was billowing out from under the door, filling the hallway with a warm mist. But something felt wrong. I couldn't place it, but it was there, like a sixth sense telling me to stop. I didn't. I opened the bathroom door slowly, expecting to see Megan, waiting for me just like she'd promised. But what I saw instead stopped me cold. There, standing under the water, was my wife, but she wasn't alone. A man, taller than me, with his back turned, his arms around her waist, their bodies pressed close. She didn't see me at first, neither of them did. They were too wrapped up in each other. Too lost in the moment. I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank as I stood there, paralyzed, watching the love of my life betray me right in front of my eyes. The sound of the door creaking open caught her attention. Megan's eyes shot to mine, wide with shock and panic. She screamed, shoving the man away as if she could erase what I had just seen, as if it hadn't happened. But it had. Megan, I could barely get the words out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The room felt like it was spinning, like the walls were closing in on me. Ben, she stammered, pulling a towel off the rack, her face draining of color. The man grabbed his clothes, avoiding my eyes, and bolted past me like a ghost. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at her, standing there in front of me, the shower still running, the water turning cold as reality sunk in. Everything I thought we had, was gone in an instant. She didn't even try to explain. There was no way to explain what I had just seen. You know how they say that when your world falls apart, time slows down? Well, that wasn't exactly what happened to me. Instead, standing there in the bathroom, staring at my soaking wet, half-naked wife and some random guy scrambling to gather his clothes. I couldn't help it. I laughed. I actually laughed. Yeah, I know how that sounds. And no, I wasn't losing my mind. But something about the entire situation was just so absurd. It was like I was suddenly in the middle of one of those over-the-top rom-coms where the main character walks in on the most ridiculous scenario, and the audience can't help but laugh at how unbelievable it all is. Except this wasn't a movie. It was my life. There was Megan, trying to cover herself with a towel that was way too small to do any good, her eyes darting between me and the guy like she couldn't figure out which of us was the bigger problem. And the guy? Oh, man. He was scrambling around like a sitcom character caught in the act, pulling on his pants while hopping on one leg, tripping over his own shoes as he tried to make his great escape. I half expected him to slip on the wet floor and crash into the wall like a cartoon. And me? I just stood there, completely frozen, but I couldn't stop laughing. I mean, who does that? Who walks into their own bathroom, expecting to join their wife in the shower, only to find this? It was ridiculous. Utterly, completely ridiculous. Megan finally managed to stammer out something along the lines of, "Ben, I can explain," but the way she said it, it was like she knew how ridiculous it sounded too. Like she realized, in that moment, that there was no possible explanation that could make this any less absurd. The guy, who still hadn't said a single word, bolted past me with his shirt half on, one shoe in his hand, his hair dripping wet. He didn't even make eye contact. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. I looked back at Megan, still clutching that useless towel, and shook my head. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, still chuckling, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. This is straight out of a bad movie, Meg." She blinked at me, her face turning a deep shade of red. I don't think she knew whether to be embarrassed, ashamed, or just as amused by the sheer insanity of the situation. I didn't plan," she started, but I cut her off with a wave of my hand. No, don't even try. Honestly, I don't think anything you say right now could top this moment," I said, grinning like a man who had lost his mind, but also, maybe, found a weird kind of clarity in the chaos. It was insane. It was painful. But, God, it was also kind of hilarious. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at you, and this one? This was a curveball straight out of left field. I grabbed my clothes, still half laughing, half shocked, and walked out of the bathroom, leaving Megan standing there, dumbfounded and dripping wet. The reality of what had just happened would hit me later, but in that moment, all I could do was shake my head and think about how ridiculously surreal it all was. After walking out of that absurd scene, I sat down on the couch, still in a bit of a daze. It was like my brain couldn't decide how to process everything. On one hand, I was sitting in the aftermath of what was probably the most ridiculous situation I'd ever experienced. On the other hand, my wife had just cheated on me in our shower. I mean, I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried. The laughter had died down by the time I started thinking things through. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the weight of what I'd just walked in on was beginning to settle. But there was still this strange, detached calm about it all. It was as if the reality hadn't fully sunk in yet. I wasn't angry, not yet anyway. Just, numb. And I guess, in a way, still kind of bewildered by the absurdity of it all. Megan eventually came out of the bathroom, dressed now, and looking like she'd seen a ghost. She stood there for a moment, not saying anything, just watching me. I could see she was trying to gauge my reaction, figure out how much damage had been done. I didn't give her anything at first. I just sat there, staring straight ahead, not even looking at her. Finally, she spoke. "Ben. I'm sorry. Stop," I said, cutting her off. I wasn't ready to hear any explanations. Not now. I don't want to hear it. She bit her lip and stood there, awkwardly shifting her weight from one foot to the other, like a kid who'd just been caught sneaking cookies before dinner. It was strange, but she looked so small. Like all that confidence, that tough exterior she always wore, had crumbled in a second. "What do you want me to say?" she finally asked, her voice soft, almost fragile. I shook my head. "I don't know, Megan. I really don't. I mean, what do people usually say after something like this?" I gave a bitter chuckle, more to myself than to her. "I walked in on you, with some random guy in our shower, and all I can think about is how utterly stupid the whole thing feels." She didn't say anything, just stood there, eyes wide, waiting for me to explode or cry or do something. But I wasn't ready for that yet. I was still stuck on how bizarre the whole situation had been, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that this was real life and not some insane dream. "Look," I said, standing up and facing her. "I need some space. I need time to think." I grabbed my keys and started toward the door, not wanting to stay in that house a second longer. The air felt thick, suffocating, like the walls themselves had absorbed the mess of emotions in the room. Megan didn't try to stop me. She just nodded, a small, defeated motion, and watched as I walked out the door. I drove around for what felt like hours, mindlessly circling the same blocks, trying to get my head straight. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the image of Megan in that shower, wrapped around that guy. The absurdity of it all had started to wear off, and the reality of what I'd seen was beginning to hit hard. I pulled into a parking lot by a small diner, the kind of place you stop by for a cheap cup of coffee and to clear your head. I figured I'd sit there for a bit, try to make sense of everything. But just as I parked, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. My heart skipped for a second. Was it him? Was this guy actually calling me now? I didn't even know his name. Without thinking, I picked up, half expecting to hear some smug voice on the other end. "Ben?" the voice asked. It wasn't a man. It was a woman. "Yeah, this is Ben," I answered cautiously. "Who's this?" There was a pause, then the woman sighed heavily, like she'd been holding on to something for a while. "My name is Claire. I don't know how to say this, but I think my husband is having an affair with your wife." I froze. For a second, I didn't even know how to respond. "Wait, what?" "I know this sounds crazy," Claire continued, her voice shaking a little. "But I've known for a while that something was going on. I just didn't know with who. Until today." He left his phone unlocked, and I saw pictures. And messages. "Your wife's name came up, Ben. I'm sorry." I felt the blood drain from my face. Of all the things I'd expected to happen after today, this was not one of them. "So, your husband is the guy I just found in my house?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to reach out, but I found your number in one of their texts." There was another pause, and then, with a shaky breath, she said, "I had to tell you. I thought you deserved to know." I sat there, staring out at the street, my mind spinning. This was the last thing I expected, the other side of the affair reaching out to me. I didn't even know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh again at the sheer madness of it all. Here I was, talking to the wife of the guy who had just been in my shower with my wife. "Thanks for letting me know," I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "I guess. I don't know where we go from here." Claire's voice softened. "I don't know either, Ben. But I think we both need to figure it out." We hung up after that, and I just sat there in the car, staring at my phone. Of all the ways this could have gone, being pulled into this mess by the other woman's husband's wife was not even close to something I could have imagined. It's crazy how fast things can spiral when emotions run high. After that phone call with Claire, we didn't just leave things hanging. We kept texting, talking about what had happened, about our next steps. At first, it was just venting, two people who had been blindsided by the people they trusted most. But then, one of us, I don't even remember who, honestly, suggested the idea of revenge. It started as a joke, something dark and ridiculous we could laugh about to keep ourselves from drowning in the pain. But the more we talked, the more it started to sound like a plan. Claire was the one who set it in motion. She told her husband, Ryan, that she'd be going out with a friend to a bar that evening. Nothing suspicious. She'd done it before. It gave him the perfect opportunity to invite Megan over, thinking they'd have the place to themselves. Meanwhile, I made my way over to Claire's house under the guise of this insane plan. We were going to pretend we were cheating on them, catch them in the act of walking in on us. It was simple enough, right? Just pretend, make them feel the shock and betrayal that we'd felt. That was the plan. But when I arrived at Claire's place, things took an unexpected turn. We started out laughing, nervous as hell, both of us a little uneasy about the whole thing. Claire poured us some wine to calm the nerves, and we talked about how insane this entire situation had become. But as the evening went on, something shifted. That anger, that betrayal, it turned into something else. It was like the pain had morphed into this raw energy between us, and before I knew it, there was this spark. A real one. We were supposed to be pretending, but suddenly, the pretending didn't feel like pretending anymore. It felt real. Too real. I leaned in, she leaned back, and in that moment, we both knew something was happening that neither of us had planned for. We kissed. At first, it was soft, hesitant, but then it grew more intense. It was like all the frustration, the betrayal, and the anger we felt exploded between us. The lines between revenge and desire blurred completely. One kiss turned into another, and suddenly, clothes were coming off, hands were everywhere, and we were completely caught up in the moment. Before we knew it, we weren't pretending anymore. We were on the bed, completely naked, and what started out as a plan to fake something, turned into something wild. It wasn't just sex, it was this raw, emotional release, like everything we'd been holding inside came rushing out all at once. And that's when the door burst open. Megan and Ryan stood there, staring, completely frozen. Their mouths hung open, eyes wide with shock and horror. They hadn't expected this. The look on Megan's face, when she realized it was me in bed with Claire, her lover's wife, was priceless. I could practically hear her thoughts scrambling to make sense of the scene. And Ryan, well, I guess he never thought his wife would be the one in the bed for once. We stopped, both of us gasping for breath, tangled in the sheets, and looked up at them. It was like time stood still. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. Megan's eyes were wide, her face pale, while Ryan just stood there like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. The irony of it all. We hadn't even planned on going this far. We were supposed to just pretend. But here we were, caught in the most twisted, ridiculous revenge plot I could have never imagined. After that night with Claire, everything changed. The plan was for revenge, but the fallout was much bigger than I ever imagined. It wasn't just the shock on Megan's face, or the fact that I had crossed a line I never thought I would, it was the sudden clarity that hit me afterward. I realized, right then and there, that there was no coming back from this. Not for us. Not for our marriage. So, the very next day, I did what had to be done. I filed for divorce. I think Megan thought we'd still be in that phase of arguments, of maybe trying to work it out or talk about things. But after everything that had happened, from walking in on her in the shower with another man, to the surreal scene of her catching me with Claire, I knew I couldn't live in that limbo anymore. I needed out. I needed to move on. And fast. When I handed her the divorce papers, the shock on her face was almost as strong as the night she saw me with Claire. Megan just stood there, staring at the papers, like she couldn't believe what she was holding. "Ben, what is this?" she stammered, her eyes wide, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. "It's over, Megan," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm filing for divorce. There's nothing left between us." She blinked, as if trying to process my words. "But, you didn't even want to talk. We haven't even tried to fix this. This is moving too fast." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of relief as I spoke. "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice, and honestly, I made mine. I don't want to drag this out, Megan. I want to move on." Her expression shifted from shock to something closer to desperation. "Ben, we've been together for years. We can't just throw it all away. You slept with Claire, too. Doesn't that mean we're even? We can figure this out." But the difference was clear to me now. It wasn't about getting even, or who did what. It was about the trust that had been shattered, the love that had been replaced with something else entirely. We had crossed too many lines, and the person standing in front of me wasn't the woman I thought I'd be with for the rest of my life. That person was long gone. "I'm not doing this to hurt you, Megan," I said, my voice softening, "but this, it's broken. We can't come back from what happened. And honestly, I don't think I even want to." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes brimming with disbelief. I could tell she never thought it would come to this. She had always been the one in control, the one who could manipulate situations to her advantage. But now, she was watching everything slip through her fingers, and it hit her harder than anything else had. As she clutched the divorce papers, her hands trembling slightly, she whispered, "I never thought it would end like this." Neither did I. After filing for divorce, I thought I'd be left picking up the pieces of my life for a while. But something unexpected happened instead. Claire and I kept talking. At first, it was just about what had happened, about the whirlwind of emotions we'd both been through with Megan and Ryan. We were each other's sounding boards, two people who had been blindsided by betrayal. It was comforting to have someone who understood exactly how I felt. But then, something changed. It started slowly, with more casual conversations that weren't just about our exes. We'd talk about our day, laugh about random things, share little stories about our lives. It felt easy. Natural. And before I knew it, those late-night talks turned into something deeper. Claire and I started spending more time together, and not in the chaotic, revenge-fueled way we had before. This was different. And you know what? Claire was incredible. I found myself wondering how on earth Ryan could have ever cheated on her. She was warm, kind, and had this spark that lit up every room she walked into. We would spend hours talking about everything, books, movies, things we liked to do, dreams we had for the future. She was smart, funny, and honestly, more beautiful than I'd ever really noticed in the beginning. She made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. One evening, after we'd spent the day hiking together, turns out we both loved the outdoors, we ended up sitting on her porch, watching the sunset. Claire turned to me, a soft smile on her face, and said, "I don't know how I didn't see it before, but you're kind of perfect, Ben." I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't know about that. I think we're both just picking up the pieces here." She looked at me, her eyes warm and steady. "Maybe, but it feels like something more, doesn't it? Like maybe we were supposed to find each other through all this mess." And she was right. It did feel like that. Somehow, in the chaos of our broken marriages, we had found something real, something stable. Claire wasn't just helping me get through the wreckage of my past, she was becoming someone I genuinely cared about. I found myself drawn to her in a way I hadn't been with anyone in years. She was thoughtful, always asking how I was doing, genuinely listening to me. We'd cook together, laugh about stupid things, and she had this way of making even the simplest moments feel meaningful. It was crazy to think that just a few weeks ago, our connection had been based on shared pain, and now it was something much more. I couldn't help but wonder how Ryan had ever let her slip away. How could he cheat on someone who was practically perfect? Sure, no one's flawless, but Claire. She was everything you'd want in a partner, kind, loyal, supportive, and incredibly down-to-earth. She made me feel like I was worth something again, like I wasn't just a guy whose marriage had blown up in his face. As I looked at her that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, I realized something. For the first time in a long while, I felt happy. Like maybe, just maybe, I'd found something good again. Life has a funny way of working out in ways you never expect. When I first walked in on Megan and Ryan in that shower, I thought my world had collapsed. But looking back now, I realize it was the beginning of something better. For me, at least. Claire and I. We're together now, and honestly, it feels like everything fell into place exactly how it was supposed to. What started out as a twisted, chaotic revenge plan turned into something real, something deeper than either of us could have imagined. We've spent the last few months building something solid, something based on trust, laughter, and a shared understanding of what we've both been through. And I have to say, I've never been happier. As for Megan and Ryan, well, things didn't exactly go the way they'd hoped. Ryan, it turns out, had never intended to lose his wife. For him, Megan was just an affair, a fling to escape from whatever problems he had in his marriage. But Claire. She was the one he wanted, the one he didn't think he'd ever lose. He never expected his actions would push her away for good. When Claire left him, he spiraled into a kind of despair that was hard to watch. He tried everything to win her back, flowers, late-night apologies, promises that he'd change. But it was too late. Claire had moved on, and so had I. Ryan never wanted to lose his wife, but he couldn't undo what he'd done. The affair he thought would never have consequences ended up destroying everything he valued. Megan didn't get the fairy tale ending she expected either. I guess she thought that if I caught her, I'd forgive her eventually, that we'd go through the usual dance of repairing a broken marriage. But when I filed for divorce, it hit her harder than she thought it would. And when Ryan chose to fight for Claire instead of committing to her, she found herself completely alone. The affair was never meant to be a lifelong thing for either of them. It was just a thrill, a distraction. But for Megan, it left her with nothing in the end. And yet, for Claire and me, everything ended wonderfully. The strange, unexpected connection we found in the midst of all that chaos turned into something real and lasting. We've moved in together, building a life that's full of the things I thought I'd lost: trust, love, and a future that feels solid. We laugh together, plan for the future, and wake up each morning knowing we've both come out of the storm stronger than ever. It's wild how life works sometimes. What started with betrayal ended with me finding someone who truly sees me, who understands what I've been through because she's been there too. It wasn't the ending I expected, but it was the one I didn't know I needed. As for Megan and Ryan, well, their story ended not at all how they imagined. But for Claire and me, this is just the beginning of something beautiful.